there's the, sometimes called the deep problem, which is that consciousness depends on brain states, on what goes on in our nervous system, but your consciousness at any particular moment isn't anything like a brain state. It's got it's got a flavour all of its own, as it were, and doesn't seem to make sense to talk about it as just a lot of nerves firing off. Second to that basic problem, there are a number of others. One is that we don't seem to need to be conscious for any, or it's very hard to specify anything that we do, any psychological state or anything else, that needs consciousness. We seem to be able to do most of the things we do, if not all the things we do, without it. They're very sort of imaginative and well thought out, elegant experiments that seem to show that when, for example, we make decisions, our making the decision precedes our being conscious of the actual making the decision comes before the I'm making a decision now feeling.
So this is the MRI scans?
I'm not quite sure how this is done. It might be MRI scan, it might be some other similar kind of thing, evoked potentials or whatever. I don't understand the practical details for all these things, but something like that. Some clever way of looking at what's going on in your brain seems to show this.
The choices are predicted before we're aware of them.
The choice has already been made before the consciousness of it arises.
It's quite scary, isn't it? That we don't need consciousness.
It's sort of might put us in our place a bit, and there's the strange idea that we could be just going round non-consciously. Why shouldn't we be then? What do we need consciousness for if we can do everything without it?
You can imagine this world without consciousness, without this subjective experience of the world.
Maybe you can, or maybe you can in a sort of cold theoretical way. Maybe you couldn't really imagine it in the way that the word imagine is usually used, but maybe you could conceive it in that kind of theoretical way, perhaps. Yep.
In a world of just reactions and consequences and causality without any
a world like
narrative.
The world that was attributed to animals, or still is. At one point it was sort of an article of scientific faith, in a sense that animals don't have consciousness, so you could do what you like with them. Basically, you could practice vivisection, for example, and they make a lot of fuss, but they're not. Doesn't matter because they're not conscious; they're just reacting. It's just, and there's no reason why you shouldn't apply that kind of picture to people. Why that should be inconceivable. If you take that set of premises, there's no reason why you couldn't apply them in principle to people.
Consciousness is the buzzing of the computer fan. Something like this.
Yes, something like that, I suppose. But it gets very hard to think what it is if you look at it in that kind of way. And what goes with that sort of picture is the idea that consciousness has come in at some point in our evolution. As I was saying earlier, most people don't think bacteria are conscious, or amoebas, say, or maybe earthworms. But most people think probably that their dog is conscious, or their cat. So where does it start then? Where do you put it? Does it come in with amphibians? Does it come, or does it just come in with us? Are chimpanzees non-conscious, and is it just us? This is the continuity problem. Okay, maybe it goes with being smart, but if so, where does it come in? And the second part of that, a spin-off of that, is the idea that seems to me to be completely ridiculous, that computers could be conscious.
Mm-hmm.
If it goes with being smart, well, computers are smart, why aren't they conscious then? And why couldn't supercomputers be even more conscious? And why couldn't we just be a computer? There are people who think you can just sort of you might someday be able to download your personality onto something and that'll still be you, you know.
So where would you put it? I would be tempted to say either the only conscious thing is the only conscious creature is us humans, or it extends all the way to flies, worms.
Mm-hmm. There's a more extreme version of that second one, which is that everything is conscious. That I think this might have been Spinoza, but Max Velmans who's a consciousness expert, seems to think the same. That you can solve the continuity problem quite easily by just saying, well, everything's conscious, like things are conscious. It's just that we have our own kind of consciousness, but the whole of being, in a sense, but certainly the whole of material being is conscious. Consciousness inhabits the world.
This is quite a spiritual kind of idea, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, you could sort of take out consciousness and put in God,
Mm-hmm.
and you'd have, instead of panpsychism, you'd have pantheism, which is the theological equivalent. God is in everything. God is everything.
Nice.
I think there are probably kind of difficulties with it, but I sort of think I know what it means. I've got a feeble sense of what it means. If you look at a beautiful view or something, you have a sense of what it was that gave rise to the idea of God. I think a sense of Wordsworth's thing, a sense of a greater intelligence or something like that, a greater kind of a greater something which isn't purely material going on in it all. A sense sublime. Do you know that line? A sense sublime of something far more deeply interfused, whose dwelling is the light of setting suns, etc. I don't know any more of it. Wordsworth's.
Once upon a time, upon an era, upon an age forgotten, there was a man. This man was the most ordinary man to have ever fallen from heaven. He had slipped away from God and the cherubs, quite simply and with relative ease, due to the fact that he was completely unremarkable. He fell to earth in a particularly large raindrop and settled in a house made from a giant beech tree's roots. Unlike the other men and women who came to earth from above, this man simply wanted to live on soil with nature and didn't want to perform miracles of any kind. He lived a lonely life, feeding on fruits from the forest. He knew nothing of passion, of jealousy, of hate, of anything that lovers suffer. One day, while picking some particularly plump strawberries, he heard what to him seemed the most peculiar sound. It was coming from a big bunch of briars that shook intermittently. The sound, as big sounds tend to do, got louder as he warily approached, and moved him to smile. At the briar bush, he started to move away the thorns, to get to the haunting sound that now vibrated his head and warmed his soul. When he finally moved the last obstructing rope of thorns, the sight was so alarming that he collapsed then and there, right into all the thorns. What he saw was another human, a man, and not just any man, a beautiful witch who bound his spells through song. He awoke sore with scratches, not in the comfort of his mossy roots with the reassuring sound of water, but somewhere very strange indeed. He had thought that he was the only one of his kind on earth, and he'd stopped using his voice long ago, never realizing the emotion of singing. And where was he? Trees towered around him, and his bed was of sweet, scented petals. He stood up and looked around. The trees made a perfect wall and shelter, and a natural door and windows had been made as the branches had woven together in the strangest manner. "Are you sore?" A silky flute-like voice spoke. He spun round and found that the witch was by his side, quite unexpectedly. He nodded and looked at his scrapes sadly. "Come, eat something," the witch beckoned. Finding he was hungry, he agreed and followed. Outside on display were the plains and the mountains, and he could see the tree he called home far, far below. He became aware that he was very high up on a great green mountain, and observed that a young spring had covered the world in blossoms, from the forest to the plains. He uttered his first words since leaving heaven. "Who are you?" His dry throat spoke. The stranger passed to him a rich, sweet fruit, and replied, "I am the witch of night's still whispers." He felt compelled to touch the witch, and stepped forward to do so. He softly placed his hand against the witch's face, but as he did, the witch faded and disappeared. Confused and in love for the first time, the man grabbed at the space where once had stood a figure, but his hands fell through thin air. As he dropped to his knees, he heard the voice once more singing, "I shall wait forever as the days turn to night, swallowed in the shadows that glow." Without knowing what to do, he cried to the sky, and as he did, the sky cried back. Days went past, and so became weeks, which turned there into months. The man thought of the witch, who now he could not love more than aught but God himself. He remembered how lovely things were when he was alone, but now he had experienced what life could give, he could not go back. At times, especially on the slow nights of summer, he thought he heard singing. And so it became winter, and neither had the witch of night's still whispers appeared to him, nor left his thoughts. Nothing would be the same again until he came back. A big crystal blue tear rolled down his nose and dripped off his chin. As it hit the ground, it made a sound like ice cracking, and the ground seemed to freeze. The tear didn't soak into the earth, as water tends to do, but stayed in a ball of blue above it. Quite forgetting his sadness, the man watched the enchanted tear as it started to roll upstream, freezing the earth as it went. The man followed the sad, salty sphere for over a week, and now most of the land had frosted over, when suddenly the tear stopped its steady pace. The man also stopped, wondering where it had led him. He took his eyes off the tear and found himself next to a glimmering lake, a lake of tears. The plain man from heaven knew not what to do. He found the lake of the beautiful witch's song, and had expected to find the witch there. No such luck. He gathered food and set up a small fire, for he was inhumanly hungry and tired, and set about to eat and then to sleep. As he closed his eyes, he heard the sound from the briar bush leave his own lips. He was singing for the first time.
Bada bada boom, bada bada boom, bada bada boom, bada bada boom.